Halfway through the creation of my piece, I handed out questionnaires during a rough edit screening that my class did, with mainly closed quantitative questions so that I could gauge a more general response in terms of how people felt. The questions were, for instance, do you understand that the film is about religion? Or would you like to watch the film again? And those sort of things were quite helpful, and I would have tried to incorporate some of those, but generally I got quite good feedback. Something to attract my audience was the music. In particular, I find it quite enticing. It's quite slow, drawn out, and I also feel it's quite sad. It's almost... You almost feel quite just generally sad when you're listening to it. Alongside the images, I think it sets up a strong sense of impending doom, and it also makes you feel the atmosphere of the whole movie in just a few seconds. As soon as the title card has been played, you can just see that this girl, you can see that the body in the woods is clearly in danger. And I tried to incorporate a few hooks. For instance, there's a body in the woods, and it stands out from the fact that it's in white. The girl is in danger. They can see that the girl's in danger. You can see her bare feet, her bare arms, and that's shown through and that's also reinforced through the images that are around her. For instance, the holy images, the constant flashing of those, and also the clips that show Aaron holding things. They're very different, and these I personally think that these are enough to draw in an audience because it keeps them paying attention. You might just, when you're first watching the film, you might think, oh, we're just going to be seeing a sequence of things in the woods, but you don't. You see a variety of props. For instance, you see a newspaper headline article, you see a pocket watch, you see a crucifix hanging from a tree, and I think from showing these people, before, they all felt that they all had quite strong connotations. And none of them particularly show the personality of the man himself, because they were essentially things that he'd either used, for instance, the Polaroid camera, or things that he had taken from his victims, for instance, the earrings or the rosary crucifix necklace. From showing the images, the holy images, the ones that flash in their short sequences before, they found that they continue to watch because they're waiting for the next sequence to appear. The soul images don't seem to just have a connection. For instance, the ones in the sequence where there's the Bible quote that states, and be unclean until the even. People found it a lot harder to make a connection with those ones because they weren't so long, but these sequences of images, they flash by, but you could then memorise each of them. Something else that was a hook was the fact that you can see Sadie's face, which means that you can definitely sympathise with her a lot more, because you can see that she's young, she looks innocent from the freckles and the earrings and even her clothes, and through this you can sympathise her. For instance, with media product would be Marion Crane from Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, because you know the danger that they're in, but they evidently do not. I mean, obviously at the beginning of my piece you cannot see that Sadie, you cannot really tell who Sadie is in relation to this man, but you get the sense that she's a victim. Essentially she is a victim, but not quite in the sense that Marion Crane is, but you can tell, you just get the sense that they're both very much in danger. Who would the audience be for your media product? From my market research, I found that 15 to 24-year-olds made up over half the people that I surveyed, and hence I wanted to target my film towards them. I also found that, a younger generation is much more likely to be a group of open-minded individuals. Obviously there are exceptions, but they're definitely slightly more accepting of new things and challenges towards conventions. Secularisation and declining stigmas towards challenging ideas, such as this one, which puts religion to a very negative light, are something that people are a lot more just view. They're less likely to be offended by negative representation of something. I also feel that younger people tend to be more swayed by popular culture, and they watch popular thriller films, if it's their cup of tea or not. For instance, a lot of people I know have watched Shutter Island, despite the fact that they do not enjoy that kind of film at all. But through doing so, they've discovered that they do actually quite like the mysterious, suspense-filled film. In what ways does your media product use, develop, or challenge forms and conventions of real media products? One of the main things that's in my piece, which is quite a convention, is the is Sadie's dress, which is very white. This points to Helmut Nichols' white hats, black hats theory, where the cowboy wearing white was the good cowboy, and the one wearing black was generally the antagonist. Also, the white gloves that Aaron wears are similar to the white hats that the bombers wear in Body of Lies, because in their minds they are doing something good, but they are obviously not, which is also something that Aaron's doing. That's his motive behind the whole thing. He's trying to ensure that good comes of his actions. In terms of conventions, again, I feel there's definitely a sense of entrapment and despair felt from the woods. For instance, the trees behind the location, they act almost like barriers. She's inside a slightly well-lit location, but you can definitely tell that there's a much better life out behind that. It's much brighter, and this also brings in the stereotypical convention of the bars. And obviously in the sink, when the blood swirls around, and also when the knife is in the sink, you can see the bars on the sink, which is something that is definitely, and again, going alongside the typical thriller convention of bars. In terms of the shots that I used in my media product, I felt that there's not necessarily a massive variety of unusual shots. There are lots of close-ups, meaning you don't directly see a human until the end. For instance, in the title sequence for the TV show Dexter, where you don't actually see his entire face until basically the last few seconds of the sequence. You don't see Aaron's face at all, which definitely denies him of humanity, I feel, because you can't see any of his expressions, and you don't see his eyes, and obviously people say that eyes are the windows to the soul. You see Sadie's eyes very clearly, yet all you see of Aaron is his hands and perhaps just the very edge of his arm. In terms of characters, there's a typical male killer, female victim kind of structure in this piece, which I think definitely asserts a sense of inevitable power. He, as I mentioned before, represents religion, and this also reinforces the idea of how inescapable it is when you've been brought up in that way. There's a classically psychologically disturbed character in my piece, in the form of Aaron with his obsessive compulsive disorder. So I think that's another convention which I have incorporated within my piece. In terms of location, I've again used quite a stereotypical location in my piece, the wooded location. It's quite a typical it's quite a typical setting, and I think woods are definitely a typical convention because they're isolated, they're quiet, and through Aaron leaving the body there of this girl, there's a lot less chance she'll be found anytime soon. In terms of a real media product, which this is familiar to, for instance, the Blair Witch Project, obviously it's dark in there, and that Blair Witch Project is supernatural, but there's just a complete and utter sense of despair, and you just feel completely and utterly lost in a woods, and I think that's something that I was definitely trying to incorporate. What kind of media institution might distribute your media product best, and why? In terms of which media institution, I feel that the best way to distribute my film in particular is through YouTube, because it's physically easier for an audience to access, because it's online, it's free, and it's mostly unrestricted. Of course, there's music videos and such which are restricted to people in certain countries, but mine in particular is not, because I've uploaded myself and I've not affiliated with anything else. I think it's a lot easier to reach my target audience, because 15 to 24-year-olds are constantly using these social networks. And also, it's definitely easier for me to gain feedback on my piece, because people are more likely to voice an opinion on YouTube in the comment section, which could be potentially very helpful if this ever was to progress into something more real, for instance. In order to generate an interest, it could be distributed on social networking sites such as Facebook or Twitter. In order to generate interest for my piece, so that people could, find it in the first place, I think my piece could be distributed through social networking sites such as Facebook and Twitter, because these will be able to help me reach my target audience of 15 to 24-year-olds. Despite the fact that my film is probably different to most mainstream thrillers, I don't think that I would be able to actually attain any production company funding, for instance, through working title or warp films, because it doesn't particularly challenge any conventions, and it's probably not innovative enough to actually get the funding to actually make it into a real film.